Good to go.
Sweet.
Hi, Austin.
Hi, Mike.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. What about you?
Good. Good. Yeah. How was the race for you?
The race was fun. Yeah. So we just finished an Olympic triathlon over in the Boulder Reservoir, which was very fun. And yeah, I had the shortest part of the swim, which was very nice 21 minutes or so. Yeah, and I'm feeling pretty good now. Got some food and I'm all set.
Yeah, you had the earliest race there, earliest start time there. Yeah, hopefully it wasn't like too much fighting in the water there, and hopefully you can finish relatively injury-free. I don't know what happens.
Yeah, I think it spaced out pretty early, or pretty far apart early on, which was kind of nice. So for a good, I say 75% of the time, I could only see one person in front of me and there's nobody next to me, which wasn't ideal because I was hoping to not have to look up and to watch the person next to me, but that's okay. It didn't work.
So we chose this race here like more based on what people enjoy, and like obviously you really like the swimming part, and yeah, I really like the biking part, and yeah, I really likes the running part. Were you a big swimmer growing up?
Yep. Yeah, I swam actually my whole life. So I learned how to swim in a small summer pool that was 20 yards, so not quite the competition length. And then it was at a hotel actually too. It was a long pool for hotel, but a short pool for actual swimmers. And then learned how to do it there, and then worked my way all the way through high school, all the way through college, and now do it for fun.
Sure. At a hotel? Why a hotel?
It was just because it was the only pool. It was the only pool in the city actually that was there. There was no like community center, YMCA, etc. pool. There was just this hotel pool, and so everybody, if you wanted to swim in the city and not have to go to the neighboring cities, then you swam the summer league, or you swam during normal times in that pool that was there too. So yes, we did a lot of swimming at a non-ideal warm 20-yard pool is how I learned how to swim.
Oh, interesting. And then so like you started off in a pool, eventually you like joined teams in different leagues?
Yeah, I started for the hotel pool, did that for the whole summers until like high school, until the last 2 years of high school. And then also played tennis, and I was just much better at swimming than tennis. So I decided if I wanted to be really good at one, I should just throw all my eggs in one basket. Yeah. And then I swam for a team that swam at one of the neighboring pools that was 25 yards, had people and like good swimmers, yada yada. Not like there weren't good swimmers in the other pool, but it was different because everybody was there to like specifically train for multiple hours, right? So I think that came across, it was just easier to get better if you did that. So I did that for 2 years then before going to college.
Okay. And so like going into college there, did you take it, like, did you compete in college?
Yep. Yeah. So it was D3 in Rochester. So you kind of got the best of both worlds, in my opinion, because you had everybody there. It was an engineering school, so most people were engineering. And then you also had the competition because it was still pretty competitive. Yeah. And so you had a little bit of both. So it wasn't enough to burn me out, which I think I appreciated because I still enjoy it and still like to do it. And I think a big reason of that is because I, did a D3 team that it was intense, but not like so intense that I never wanted to look at the water again.
I hear like D1 teams, essentially that is your major. Like when you're in a D1 school and you're playing for a D1 team at whatever sport, like that essentially takes over your whole college career there, and it's really difficult to focus on any other like subjects that you were going in for originally. Like it's hard to make time essentially for running like 2 full-time jobs, and especially with something like engineering where you need so much focus. I think like a D3 school may have a better balance there.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me that was good. Also, I might have made the D1 team, right? I would not have been top swimmer on a D1 team either. So I think that it was a nice it was just, it's always nice to win sometimes. So, so it was good to go in a league that I knew that would be better off to do that in. So yeah, I was happy with that decision though. I thought it was good.
Yeah. Do you for D3, do you notice like the competition levels were still like difficult, or was it just like a lot easier?
I think there's still really fast people that go onto it for similar reasons, where maybe they wanted to do more focus on their major if they did something that they thought they were going to have to put more time to. And so as a result, there's some super fast D3 swimmers then that were there too. So I think it was still, you could definitely still find the competition anywhere. I mean, of course, if you were to like put that D3 team next to a D1 team or a D2 team, but more likely D1 team, obviously the D1 team would win by quite a bit. But it's still, I think like it wouldn't be, it would, the competitive level I think was similar among all the teams, which was nice.
And I know we discussed like the balance there a little bit between like your actual school education major versus a sport, right? In swimming, like did you find it difficult to balance out the two?
I think I found that it was just a lot of time, so I didn't have a lot of free time for other activities. It was really swimming, school, and random social activities with friends. And yeah, so I say it was difficult to do it, but once I got in the routine of knowing, I had to the big thing was doing things early, right? You had to finish everything early, finish it on time, finish it early enough that you knew you would be on time, even if something came up that you had to postpone things or you were a couple hours behind. So yeah, I think time management was a big thing to make that happen.
For like the culture there, was it like a really strict culture in swimming there? Like was everybody like super like into it, or were people relaxed?
I think it was pretty relaxed. People were pretty loose. You were expected to show up and expected to complete everything, and you would have gotten yelled at if you weren't, but it wasn't like, I don't know, it was a fairly relaxed culture other than that.
Would you say most people on the team had really hard like STEM majors while doing the sport, or do you think like they were relatively a little easier so they can focus a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that maybe, I don't know, 60% of the people were STEM, maybe 70%.
That's good,
which is representative, I would say, of like the college as a whole, just because there was arts and sciences, which was good and which was important to have, but it was definitely not the focus. Also, it was one of those things where you were paying enough that it probably didn't make sense to go to the tech school if you were doing arts and sciences, right? That, like, it was nice to have, and people minored and could kind of be a little bit more multidisciplinary. But you probably went to a different school. If that was like what you really, really wanted to do, then maybe it wasn't the best for you, unless you wanted to do a mix of both, in which case then it was really special because now you had both opportunities to kind of like combine the sciences and the arts together, which I think was really cool to see as well.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I always found it really hard to juggle like sport and school at the same time, and like some of the intramural teams were really great for that, just so you don't need to dedicate so much time, and especially doing like such a difficult STEM degree there where it really requires a lot of your focus, that you have more leeway. But then, of course, like that's up to your judgment yourself too. Like if you want to be more active as an athlete, then you probably take like more of the sport route there. But I guess it's just up to you. But I've always had a lot of respect for like student athletes and like what they're actually doing, like what they're actually juggling, like just so much tremendous workload in terms of education, and then also like physical, like having to stay disciplined throughout a long period of time, at least like the semesters there, and like your diet and your nutrition, and hopefully if you get enough sleep in college. But yeah, it's just a lot to juggle for sure. And you said RIT, was the school there, and that's in New York?
Yep, it was in upstate New York, so Rochester, New York.
Okay. Why did you decide to go there other than the swimming part?
Yeah, so I was originally going to go to Kettering up in Flint, Michigan, and I was pretty set on that. Knew I wanted to do it. Brian and my brother and I were going to go to different places, and that was our plan. We knew that. I knew that, and I thought that's what I wanted. And then but we visited schools at the same time with the other person, and then went down to Rochester just for the free food, to be honest, and showed up for the free food. One of the persons who toured me around was this guy named Marty Gordon. Marty was the athletic liaison. He was also a civil engineering technology professor, but he was like a liaison between the academics and the athletics. And so he found out that I swam and I like to swim, and said, "Oh, you need to go, talk to the coach and talk to the team." And I said, "Oh, well, screw it. I'm not going to come here anyway, so I might as well just do this and skip out on all the, academic programs, honors program." There's a lot of those were the same day and the same time. So, so I dished out on the rest of it and went with Marty to the academics, and he actually changed the tour specifically for me to like go to the right places and meet the right people, which I really appreciated. And then I met the coach, and the next day decided that was something that I wanted to go there instead of going to Kettering in Michigan, and didn't look back, and it was definitely the right decision to do that.
Yeah. And the coach that scouted you out, he ultimately was the main coach, right, at RIT?
Yeah, he was the main coach there. Very funny guy. I did really like him.
Yeah. So it's good to like have somebody that like going into it, like being recruited in, like and just having.
I would say he didn't do the recruitment was funky because for D3 you can't recruit, so there is no like you can't pay for people to come out and visit, right? It was really like you're visiting the school and you might as well do this. So it was a lot. So most people were the same way, where they just decided they wanted to swim, and then and also go for this, and it was nice that you could do both, and so then you did do both. So I would say the recruitment was pretty lax as well, which kind of goes with the whole culture of what that kind of team environment was.
Yeah, New York is a big change in environment there, like in compared to the Midwest. Did you find that it was like a big adjustment period moving to New York?
I think the big adjustment was, just the college adjustment life, at least the undergrad adjustment life. So yes, for that, but because it was upstate New York, like it's pretty similar to Ohio in that if you go 30 minutes out of the city, you're to farmland. And it was the same deal in Rochester, where specifically the school was in Henrietta. So if you went, 20 minutes out of Henrietta, you were into the farmland of upstate New York, and a lot of dairy in upstate New York is too. So some dairy farms. So I'd actually say that they were more similar. Just Rochester was a lot more, had more forests, I would say, more green, more hiking trails to do. The Adirondacks are around there too, a little further out, like 5-ish hours. But that's where I got more into like hiking and outdoor stuff, was since going to Rochester, New York.
Yeah, because it sounds like it. You have more nature available to you, and like I think a lot of people's pictures of New York is like New York City and like the whole city life and like the hustle and bustle. But that's good that you found like a place or like an area of New York where it was like not that. It was the complete opposite of that. So you can actually like hone in and focus.
Yeah, because New York is so big, right? There's it was funny because I told a lot of people when I told them I was going to New York. Most people just think of, if you haven't been to upstate New York, it's only New York City is in New York, right? And so I was like, oh no, like very, very different places, like very different places, not nearly as many people. Even though I think Rochester is up there in the top cities population wise, but Henrietta was just a suburb kind of Rochester, so Henrietta was obviously not really near the same population density. And then so definitely dissimilar to New York City for sure. A lot less people, more cows, more fields. just a little less hustle and bustle, I think.
Yeah, so there's like less distraction and you can like focus in more on schooling and swimming there.
I'd say so. Yeah. I mean, there was plenty of things to do still, which is nice. And if you wanted to go into the city, right, you could do it. I think that just because I had to choose my activities and like stick with them, right, it was really swimming, school, and for a while there, right, that was the two big ones. And mostly and then like the honors program, we did a lot of stuff with that. And then like the campus ministry there, did some things with that too. So, but yeah, those were like the main groups, with swimming and the school stuff definitely taking up the lion's share, I would say, of time.
I personally, I'm not a big swimmer. I'm not a huge swimmer. I do swimming like just in order to do triathlons essentially. But I also don't like hate swimming either. Like I find it very like therapeutic a lot of the times, and like definitely different lane distances are really great. Like you can go finally like see the difference between like a 25 yarder and like a 50 meter. Yeah, so that's really great for just like thinking time essentially. Like it was part of the reason you did swimming, like just to have like an avenue to take a break from schooling.
I think that definitely helps. I think that it's very kind of like meditative. You can just think, you can just think, which could be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess, depending on what you're thinking about. But there was always an interesting point, and this I'm sure happens in every sport or activity, that you're like exerting so much that it's impossible to have any other thoughts than like, I need to finish this, and like you're really in the moment thinking about how much you have left to do, and that would only happen every once in a while, usually like if it was a very hard practice, right? But usually at least once throughout every practice I would have that feeling where just exerting myself so much that I just didn't have energy to think about anything else except like, I need to finish this, I need to go this fast, and I need to be done. So I think that part was really nice. And I think I haven't hit that quite as much. Like it's hard to hit that point because that point was kind of high up. So right, like even in the triathlon today, I don't think I ever hit that point, which was good because it meant that I wasn't, well, like good and bad. Bad in that, I wasn't, that intensity wasn't quite as high, but good in that it wasn't always a comfortable point. So it's nice to not have to hit that point every day anymore, but to kind of like choose it. But I think when it does happen now, I'm more appreciative of it, and I say, oh, well, that was nice. Like I got that point again.
Yeah. And like now you get to come out and kind of pick your own schedule of when you want to do races, and like you're not really stuck to like this whole specific routine that like a coach is giving you and this whole season. So I can see that that's much more like, relaxing.
Yeah, relaxing and just easier. I don't go as hard. So I'm going slower, but I you don't hurt as much when you do it, which I think is sometimes nice.
Just like a sport is great as like a stress reliever, as obviously, or like mental health too, from schooling and just workload. But I would imagine if you're trying to do it as like your main sport, it sort of becomes like a main component in your life too, and you're trying just as hard on that as your schoolwork. So that could become difficult, as you said, like going really hard all the time. Like you're kind of burning yourself at both ends, like physically and mentally. Do you think like there was a lot of burnout there for students going through that?
I would say probably yes. I think a good amount of the people I swam with didn't want to look at a pool again after they had finished, and we're happy with that. And most of them, I will say, have probably hopped back in and done a little bit and like enjoy it again. So it wasn't a lasting burnout. But yeah, I think that if you have done it, if you did it your entire life from learning to swim through middle school, through high school, through undergrad, and you did club teams throughout the summer, and you swam every year, then after like 18, 20 years of doing it, I think, or I guess it'll be less than that, but 15, 14 years of doing it, I think most people get burned out.
Like since you've been doing it as a kid and you just go nonstop throughout all the different camps, like you said, ultimately to college, like that would be really, really stressful. Like you keep doing it day after day. Like that is a different type of dedication, right? And I think like opening yourself up to a lot of variety is really fun too. Like I think if you're injured from running, I can hop into swimming. Or like if I don't feel too great in the pool, I can hop into a bike, right? Or even go lifting, right? Something different. It is always fun to have variety, but for those guys that like keep on one specific discipline, like really great on them, and they could usually they could become really really great at it, or they can burn out, right? And I think burnout happens probably more often than not. So yeah, it's interesting how you've been doing it since you were really really young, and you're like able to keep that up. Like did you ever try to venture out into any other sports?
I played tennis for a little bit. That's really it, to be honest. Yeah, tennis and swimming were the big ones. But I didn't start doing it competitively until like 2 years before college. And so I think that's why I didn't burn out, was because I didn't swim all year round. I took a break after summers, and I think that really helped me a lot.
So going back a little bit more into the swimming there, like for like there's been a lot of like big news on like transgender swimming and like different sexes joining different leagues there. Like so for the big one there was the one case where the male athlete has transitioned and then swimming into the women's league there, and then sort of dominating that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, specifically Leah Thomas is the one that you're talking about, right? The Pennsylvania or Penn State swimmer, or UPenn, I forget, one of the two. But I mean, honestly, I think that she should be able to swim with whichever group she feels most comfortable with. At the end of the day, I think that if you look at the time, so one, I think, misnomer is if you were to look at say that there's pictures that go around the show, like Leah Thomas is like a full length ahead of this person, and they circle the person in the far lane who's maybe 15 seconds behind, and everybody gets outraged that she's going so much faster. However, there's some, I think, particularities to it, namely that swimming is circle seated in championship meets, which means that the slowest swimmers are on the outside, the fastest swimmers are on the inside. So of course you're going to have a 10 to 15 second difference between your inside swimmers and your outside swimmers. And so I think that those pictures kind of are used to draw sensationalists and kind of used for more political benefit, as opposed to really drawing the picture between what's actually happening here. I think it's totally fair to try to draw the argument of maybe we should do some more research, and we should look at what's the differences for transgender athletes versus non-transgender athletes, and trying to see if research shows that things are incredibly unfair, then that's a different talking point. But I think right now it's incredibly too early to really even draw conclusions, because the sample size is just so small. So if you look at it from purely just research perspective from it, I just don't think it's so premature to draw these unarching conclusions from like such a small sample size. That I think it's fair to bring up the concern. That's perfectly fair to talk about, but I think it's unfair to villainize somebody because of it, because of some deep set belief that you may or may not have.
So it's more like gray area, at the moment.
I think there's just not enough research to back it up. I mean, if you look at Leah's times, for instance, her times are not. It is not abnormal to improve by that much from championship. Like another article that gets sent out is how much improvement from a regular dual meet that you do. You say, you're 10 seconds faster from this. Well, if you're 10 seconds faster from your very slowest meet that you're not trying on, versus when you're shaved, tapered, and like competing at the highest level, right? Like just making sure that everybody's comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, I think it really helps alleviate some of these kind of sensationalist headlines, I would say.
Yeah.
As somebody has a really strong opinion that transgender people shouldn't compete in, and so therefore you're going to grasp for any type of data point that you can see, and so you're going to be now you're drawing the picture between the person in the far lane and the person in the center lane, but not realizing that it's swimming is circle seated, so that's why the times are so different from that. And then sensationalist, because you're drawing times from a dual meet versus a championship meet, not realizing that everybody is performing that much faster, right? I think making sure that you're like fully understanding things is the way to prevent that sensationalist headlining from coming in.
More like a bigger picture and more like context understanding.
Yeah, more context for sure.
Got it. Have there been any like arguments the other way around where so this is the case where, you know, you started out male, transitioning to female, and then going in the female league. The other way around, like has there been a female transitioning to male and then having I don't know, difficulties when it comes to competition?
Honestly, I wouldn't be. I know there is one particular, but I don't know enough specifics to really answer well.
Okay. Yeah, because it's sort of like it's sort of like you understanding that you have a male at the beginning and having that biological like driver, and
yeah,
then
but
going
I think
to
the
female.
question becomes, right, like if you transitioned and you're taking estrogen,
Yeah.
and you're suppressing, right, like if you were to take estrogen now, your bike time would have not been anywhere close to what it was now, right? And so the question then becomes, is that bike time the same if you have been born a woman as well, right? And so I think that's the rare research, but I think there's pretty factoid that when you transition, your times will be slower, right? That is, like, you're not going to have the same strength. You're not going to have the same, you're just not going to have the same performance output as you were. And so I think it's definitely not a 1-to-1 with that.
Got it.
I have one more thing to remember to say to make sure. So that's how I get my my facts right too on it, is that and this is specifically for Leah Thomas at swimming, is that she did not take, like, the dominating the field, right? She did not dominate the field in all events because, like, she got fifth in 200 free or whichever one it was, but she didn't. It's not like she was winning each event, and the ones that she did win, she won by like 0.3, 0.5 seconds, right? It was not a standout. And if you look at somebody like Katie Ledecky, for instance, who's the Olympic standout for distance swimming, especially, right? Like, her times were like 30 seconds faster in the mile or in the 1,000, right, for these long course distances. So I think that's another avenue, is that like, if it was 2 minutes faster, then I think it would become an easier question to answer on how much of a difference and is this fair. But I think having it be so close means that one, it becomes a muddier problem to solve, and two, it becomes totally within the realm of reason that anybody could do that. Anybody could make that improvement and come out on top or come out in fifth, right?
So you're saying the margin isn't like as big as some people paint it out?
I'm saying, yeah, the margin of saying using the word dominates, I think, is hard because you got fifth, right? Like, I got fifth today. I didn't dominate, right? And so I think that is when that becomes a little bit harder, because that's when the sensationalist images show more hand, because it's easy to look at those and say it dominated, but it's hard to look at somebody who took fifth and say, wow, this, like, solely can be the only reason that they did well, right?
I think it's so fun to try something new, just every now and then, and be like, so you can just take like a mental break from the one thing that you've been doing for so long. It's just like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think I've done that more here since just having more time to pick different activities. So I think I've definitely done more random activities now than before.
Yeah. And I know the other component was engineering that you had said. Was there, like, what drew you to engineering?
That's a good question. I think, it wasn't the traditional stereotypical, like, I like disassembling things, putting things back together. I really don't like cars. I'm not a big fan of airplane like work. I love traveling, right? But I wouldn't want to work in an aerospace company. As of now, maybe that would change. But Yeah, so I think for me, it was because I wanted to do something that was more math and science heavy. Wasn't sure what it was, mechanical. I didn't want to do environmental because I thought environmental people did a lot of like wastewater treatment plants and thought that that wasn't quite my alley that I wanted to do. And then, yeah, mechanical I thought was most broad. So honestly, that's the whole reason is because I thought mechanical engineering sounded smart and it sounded the most broad, and that was really it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting how like your approach wasn't like a stereotypical one, right? And that you went into it because you actually enjoyed it. I would imagine, right?
I think I didn't. Well, I didn't know I was going to enjoy it going in. It was literally, it seemed smart and it was broad. And then it wasn't until probably the first year I did it that I realized that I did, I don't know, I did well in the classes and I liked what I was learning. Yeah, still though was not like dead set on it. Didn't think like I liked it and it was fine and I was going to finish it, but it wasn't something that I don't know, felt like very passionate. I was more passionate about swimming than I was about the school that I was doing from that.
It's kind of like a tug and pull if you're doing two things simultaneously at once and you're trying to, give your best essentially at both, right? And again, that's why I have so much respect for like student athletes that decide to do that. Were there any like specific sector of engineering that you liked?
Yeah, I think doing something renewable energy was one part that I was really interested in. And so as a result, I most of the time when I started something new, I knew a general path of what I wanted to take. So for the renewable energy side was NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Lab, has some sites in Colorado, up in the road in Boulder. There's the wind site down in Golden, Colorado, is the kind of solar, chemical engineering, battery folk, things like that. And I had heard about them for a while because there's these amount of professors that do a lot of things with national labs. The NREL is very well known because of that. The Department of Energy is also well known. And so so I think that's how Boulder got on my list, and also that's how my focus became more towards the renewable energy side of things.
Renewable energy, so like all types of renewable energy, or like one specific one that
I think in first off it was all types. I just thought it was interesting and important, but didn't have a focus area right as I was going through undergrad. There really was no focus area. Everybody learns the same thing. You learn the same fundamentals. When you go off on your internships, because RIT, you had to do a year's worth of internships to graduate. So it was kind of incorporated into everything. So I went into the internships, the things that were energy dependent, I think, or when I interned at NREL, right, was one of my favorite internships because I just found that I liked it and it was an interesting topic area to do.
in Boulder here, is it more specific towards like wind energy?
Yeah, in Boulder for sure. Yeah, but so it's the National Wind Technology Center, which is the site that's off there with all the wind turbines, and they do primarily wind, water, and a lot of simulation work, I would say.
Wind, water, simulation. And then, so is that currently what you're doing now in wind and water?
Yeah, now I switched gears a little bit and did more thermal things. My focus area has always been additive manufacturing, which is how I again stayed broad within mechanical, because additive is in 3D printing is in everything, and there's just you could really 3D print anything. So I thought that was the best way to stay broad. That's kind of been the story of what I've done, is I've tried to not become very specific and try to kind of be a master of all trades type thing. And I think that, doing the additive approach helped me do that. And then combining it with the renewable energy was just kind of how I made myself a little bit more niche, was to look at how can you use 3D printing to kind of really design something or make something that's special to energy or renewable energy to make it better.
Yeah, I think we need it. I think there's a lot of burning of fossil fuel, and trying to find alternative sources is really great. And I would imagine moving out west, there's more opportunity for that, just because maybe there's more sun, more wind. etc. So now moving forward, like, do you think you're gonna like work in industry with renewable energies?
I think that is coming up fast to be decided. I think that there are two really options here. One option is that, but I do think that my focus area has been a lot on the additive side, where it would be great to stay with energy, but I'm not opposed to going more towards the fundamental 3D printing side and looking at, how do you print things better? What types of printers can you make, and doing more machine design, which is what I did for 2 internships that I really liked. And I could see myself going back to that. I think if I do the renewable energy wind part, then that would be where the postdoc abroad comes into play, and go to Norway or one of the Scandinavian countries, or just somewhere not in the United States to try that out. And so I think that's where I could see myself continuing with renewables. And then after that postdoc, whether or not I stay in the renewable side or do something totally different, I'm not quite sure. Or I do like doing things that are different or new, or learning something new. So part of me feels that maybe doing something new would be a good thing to do.
Stimulating, right? Like, you get to try a variety of different things instead of, again, pigeonholing yourself to just one thing. Norway, that's really far from the US. Like, what is there, aside from like the renewable energy stuff, is there like a reason why you're really interested in Norway or any of the Scandinavian countries?
So I think it was on the list because, similar to why Boulder was on the list, was because they do a lot in renewables and wind. And so I thought that seemed like could be a good fit because of that, if I wanted to do something similar and continue research down that vein. But yeah, you're right. Other than that, there was I have no Norwegian ancestry, which is what, when we were there, a lot of people that would comment was, you come to Norway because you have distant relatives that are Norwegian, and so you want to experience it yourself, so you come there, and that was the story. That's not my story, so I think it was just somehow it got in my mind that was the place that I wanted to try next. And so then that's when I started like seriously looking at avenues and options that could get me out there.
I think like those northern countries like Norway, I think they have very like really strong people because it's just so cold.
That's funny.
It's just so cold out there, and they have to be like really resilient, throughout their whole life essentially. And like does the cold, like, is that something that you really enjoy, like cold weather activities like skiing or snowboarding, or like do you mind that at all, or do you more tend towards like a warmer weather?
Yeah, I think I like both. Ohio was cold. Rochester was even colder. Have even colder summer or winters that lasted a little longer, and just got a lot of snow because it also had the lake. Both of them had lake effect snow, so you just had a lot more precipitation than you would in other places. And Rochester just had incredibly long winters, so it was like much longer than here. So here, coming to Boulder, Colorado, I think felt like the tropical, like you got a little bit of everything. The sun was so strong, it melted everything off. And so I think this was my, if I wanted to go to a place that had less snow, then I chose here, which was why I chose here. I remember thinking of Rochester during one of the like long winters that in my last year after being there for 5 years, and I said, wow, man, I'm ready to be done with this. I'm ready to go somewhere that's not quite this snowy. And then Boulder accomplished that. So, but now after 5 years, maybe I think I'm okay. Like, I didn't do poorly in the snow and that, and just had to keep my same routine, and I was okay. So I could see myself going back for, especially if it's only a 2-year stint, then I think I would have no problem going back to the snowy centers for 2 years. I could totally do that, and I would be okay.
It's just like so dark sometimes.
I mean, but Michigan's pretty dark too.
Sure. But yeah, I for sure, like, I think we've spoiled ourselves here in Colorado and getting sun a lot of the times. I think it would be like a big adjustment to go somewhere, like Alaska or something, or one of these northerly countries where it's just so dark. It was the last time we found it was like, 4 or 5 hours of daylight
Yeah.
per day
And we
there.
were also not there during like we were there during like the worst time, quote unquote, because it had less. But there was actually a time, right? We were told before that there was less lights. That like we went during not the time where it was getting lighter each day, not when it was getting darker and at the peak. And it was also, there's something about having it be, if it's going to be dark, if it's having it be snowy is nice. Dark and rainy and cloudy is, I think, less nice. So I think that would kind of suck.
Do you think you'll do more like winter sport and activity in Norway?
I mean, I did decent amount here because I got into skiing last year here, but I think for sure doing more Nordic, definitely a lot of more Nordic skis, maybe some cabin trips to the Hittas there or Hitter. I think that would be fun to do that.
Yeah, you can get into like the spas, right? Like the saunas,
Yeah.
right? And the yeah, the saunas there was really nice for like especially when it's like super cold and frigid, and you get to do the switch to hot cold and like jump in the really cold water and go back into the sauna there. I think that was really nice.
Yeah, I think that could be fun. That could be the, as soon as you get tired of winter, you just, get a ticket to the sauna and make that your way to get some warmth back in.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is only like a short stint.
I think so. Yeah, I do think that I would eventually want to come back to the States. Maybe I decide no. Who knows? Maybe I next year comes around and I say, oh, I'd really love to, I don't know, spend some more time out there, or I go really love it and decide to stay longer. But yeah, I do think though that having it be a short term seems more right now. It seems more like what I was looking for.
And again, you said Norway was really big into renewable energy.
Yep, Norway has a ton of wind. Interestingly for them, their entire country is hydropowered. They make enough energy for hydro to power the vast majority of the country. However, are also really big in the renewables. They're on the coast there, so they've got a lot of wind resources, especially offshore wind resources. And then they've also put a ton of money into it, where I think their goal by 2030, 2040, whatever the number is to have basically the same amount of power needed to power their country from wind as well. So now they've kind of got this like 2x amount to export. And so, yeah, they've just pumped a ton of money into it. I mean, part of the reason being that, a lot of this money comes from the like sovereign pension, or not the pension fund, but the oil money that they've gotten because they, struck it big with oil. So I think it makes sense that they have that money because of its oil money, but it is nice to see that it's being kind of reinvested into more futuristic and future forward thinking of transitioning to more carbon neutral or net zero type of energy sources.
You said the entire country is on renewable energy?
Yeah, I mean, you have to fact check me on that, but I'm fairly confident that hydro in Norway is the predominant source of energy.
But earlier in their past, they had like oil.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure when that switch was. If they had, I'm not sure. I mean, oil was always big. I'm not sure if hydro came first and then oil, or if oil came first and then the hydro part. I'm not quite sure how that was. My guess would be hydro then oil.
Yeah, that's really progressive. Like that's really efficient and really progressive. I think like from last time seeing it, going to Norway, like their automotive transport, their home energy sources, seeing the windmills, like they look really, really efficient, and like, yeah, a lot of it, maybe predominantly, is renewable energies there. But it's interesting how like, these countries, they start out with oil and now they're slowly switching over to renewable energy. Like how much can you like hop off of like fossil fuels and non-renewable energies that you had beforehand and just completely switch over to renewable?
Yeah, I think the answer is more than you would think. Where I think there's two prongs to that. One is like you can pretty easily with like current grid setups get like higher rates of wind and energy, upwards maybe 40%, 50%, without seeing grid failures or even like little faults or things happening that could be detrimental. So significantly higher than where we're at now, because right now it's 15-20% renewables, right? So you can double that to not have to pay a penalty with having to revamp your grid system. So I think that's one reason why it makes a lot of sense to do it. However, two though is I think they got it, and hydro is different than wind and solar, because hydro is pretty consistent, so you basically assume it's going to be always generating at the same rate, unless of course you have problems which you have now, right, where you have all of the, as temperatures are going up, then you're going to get less water flow. You look at Lake Mead, where Lake Mead is really low in the US right now, and you have to turn down or turn off the hydro generation plants simply because you don't have enough water that's going down the dam through the systems. So I think it used to be that hydro was considered this really it was a renewable resource, but it was a very like base loading equivalent to fossil fuels, where you always knew it was going to be on and you knew exactly how much it was going to make. But I think now that has slightly changing, simply because it's more variable, and simply there's just less water. So I think that's making it ghastly aware that there may be a problem, and the dam has to shut down because you don't have enough water to kind of power your turbines.
Yeah, and part of me thinks that like maybe it wouldn't be as difficult to completely switch over, or at least have like a predominant renewable energy source for a lot of countries. Obviously there's countries with like infrastructures that aren't ready for that, I understand, but how much of it on the spectrum is political as well, and how like people don't want to let go of fossil fuel, or at least in that industry they don't want it to stop, right? Because there's a lot of money in oil.
Yeah, I think it's country dependent, but I think especially in the United States, it's become a political issue as well as an environmental or even a technology alone issue. Where like there are certain places in, say, Wyoming, Nebraska, for instance, where it is cheaper to put a wind plant up in terms of like per kilowatt hour or per megawatt hour production, than it is to continue with a coal plant, especially. But even natural gas plants are getting close, and that's oftentimes even without having any type of governmental subsidies to fix that in. And so I think as like technology improves, there's going to be a very obvious point in the near future, and in most states, if not just like the really windy ones, that it makes just more sense to put in wind because it simply is cheaper. And I think that's what most renewable energy researchers are going for, because energy is really particular, where it's very economically focused. And so if it doesn't make money and it doesn't make energy at a rate that's cheaper for utility customers or utilities to make and give it to the customers than what's currently done, then there's nobody would do it, because it doesn't make sense. And at the end of the day, it does have to like be economically feasible to do it. So that is the gold standard for all utility grade energy production. So then having the researchers make it so that your renewable source is now under what your fossil fuel source is, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that is what most researchers are pushing for, is getting that efficiency to be so high that there is no question, it just logically makes sense to switch over to wind and solar and whatever other renewable sources that you wanted to do.
And it's just clean. It's clean.
And it's clean, yeah. You don't have to worry about as many emissions. I mean, you do have some from, you I think have a vastly net positive by switching renewables, but of course you still have to make it. You still have concrete, right, in your towers. You still have all these other things. So while it may not be completely net zero, right, you're always going to have an impact no matter what, just because the order of that you're making something. I just think the impact is so much smaller, and research shows that the impact is so much smaller than having a continued fossil fuel source, that it just makes more sense.
Oh, that makes sense. I think it makes sense environmentally. But again, there's an economic component and financial component of it. And it's like, if you make less money from switching over to renewables, like maybe your incentive for it goes down to do that. But, if it just performs just as well as, fossil fuels and oil, like maybe it is something to consider, like even though it's not for the best economic interest, like if it's overall more healthy environmentally to do so.
Yeah, I do think having both, because I think then you have 50% of the United States that's going to agree with that and 50% that won't. And so I think having the like economics prove that renewable energy is better. I mean, simply because from a sense of being able to like fuel some plant, right? If you have a renewable source, you don't have to worry about shipping in coal trains every day to power the plant. You don't have to worry about shipping in these compressed natural gas or natural gas fats. And so you just have less consumables, less logistics, and it's easier to just like, you made it, let it run. So I think that's one of the big incentives, at least financially, if you just don't have continuing costs. You have all these initial costs and then it just goes and it runs by itself other than maintenance concerns.
That's a good point. Like behind the scenes is a really good question. Like what happens behind the scenes, like in order to produce that product, right? In order to produce energy, like what is behind the scenes? Like how, like, is it actually better to go renewable energies than like fossil fuels, like creating the actual like gasoline that you pump at the gas station, or creating like the energy grid for your house using a wind turbine, like the behind the scenes of the both of those things, like in order to create that, like if it turns out like creating the renewable energies is like a lot less cost in order to create it, like maybe that is the way to go, instead of like outputting a lot of like dirty fumes or CO2 into the planet.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that one question is what's really difficult to do is how do you put the cost on some type of pollutants or emittents? Like what is the cost of having rising CO2 greenhouse gases in the atmosphere leading to higher radiative heating, right? Or global force, or whatever the word is for, just insulating environments, having higher temperatures. And so radiative forcing is the word. If you have higher radiative forcing for it, then you're going to have less water available for people to drink as well, right? You're going to have all of these repercussions that you have, and how do you put a cost on that repercussions? Because the cost of degrading the environment is something that you don't think about, because everybody is degrading the environment on a daily basis through their activities, right? But I think it's until you get to the point where one day you wake up years down the decades, or even generations down the road, and you say, oh crap, like we really messed this up beyond repair, and now it's trillions of dollars worth of damage. Like wetlands, for instance, like contribute a ton to flood runoff and preventing flooding in certain places, but as wetlands have been kind of built over to put different properties or just storefronts, yada yada yada, people living spaces even, you don't have wetlands anymore. And what's the cost to now take care of that water yourself, build a huge new sewage plant, being able to take care of this, right? Boulder has a huge flooding problem. I don't know how many wetlands are equivalent to the cost that you would put in to try to remediate these types of flooding problems. So I think that's something that is not taken into account well, is what's the environmental cost of blank XYZ and so what is the environmental cost for burning natural gas or coal at a fossil fuel plant, and how do you quantify that in addition to just how much it costs to make that coal or natural gas and ship it to the plant. And I think that is what most environmentalists and renewable energy supporters would say is the biggest thing, because that cost is so much higher than that cost the way that they might calculate it, right? Because it is a little subjective on what kind of worth do you put, or subjectively how do you put worth to some type of natural ecosystem. But I think that even if you put it to the lowest value you could possibly do, it makes it so that renewables just seem even more favorable, because you're taking into account all these externalities that are associated with fossil fuels.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it, is like the more of the whole picture way, like the holistic viewpoint of looking at what you're creating, right? Like in the moment now, like maybe it is cheaper, right, to do like a less clean process to create energy sources in the moment now, right? But then again, like we said earlier, like behind the scenes, what is the cost in order to create that energy, and like how does that impact the environment? Like, is it impacting it really negatively? And then also future costs, like down the line, what happens if you do this for so long, for decades down the line? Like, how does that impact like generations down the line, essentially, right? And if it does get really bad, now you might have to create new solutions, or like new plants and new factories in order to like combat a problem that you made. And so like looking at it that holistically, like it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy to do so. And like obviously like people's demand for energy is like now, right? Immediately. And so, you know, like maybe the immediate solution right now is like the more low hanging fruits, which is more like fossil fuels, but maybe eventually in the future we can gravitate more towards renewables, right? And honestly, the transition, right? Like I don't imagine it being like an overnight switch, right? It'd be like, oh, okay, like, you know, today we're still running fossil fuels. Tomorrow, immediately we're going to switch over to renewables, right? Probably some like transition in the middle where you're have some fossil fuels, have some renewable energies together, and then maybe one day eventually you have more.
Sure. Yeah, I would argue that we're currently in that transitional switch where, you know, there's a lot more now. Like cost competitiveness of wind and solar is pretty on par with conventional fossil fuel ways. So I think that, you know, I think we're already there. And now I think the question now becomes, how fast do you transition? And because, you know, as you wait longer, you're going to have maybe as you wait longer, it will be harder to turn back the clock to go back to the way things were. And so I think, and that's something that you don't find out about until, you know, decades down the line. And so, and you know, even we find this out here living in Colorado with all the wildfire smoke that's coming in when everything's burning. And of course, there's multi-factors to that, but a big factor is like that we've been living in a drought for the past, you know, 2 decades in Colorado and out in the West. And so, you know, rising temperatures aren't going to help that. Even, you know, even the temperature rate change we've had now, if we have, you know, smoke every summer, right, where the whole summer you just have massive amounts of forest burning up in Canada now, right, or in Oregon a couple years ago, California for sure, or even Colorado, right, where we have, you know, the Marshall Fire, we had all the other fires coming through. So I think that's kind of a wake-up call for people to say, like, okay, we should hasten our transition now, and we should do more efforts in order to try to help alleviate this problem, or not have it be, you know, try to just transition as fast as possible to avoid any more negative externalities that we would have if we went on the same path. So I think the accelerated tract is what most researchers would push for, just because you can see the further impact. But I think you're right, that accelerated path has to, the way that it gets accelerated is to have buy-in from industry, have buy-in from the people, have it so that it's not just somebody who cares about the environment, it's also somebody who can look at a piece of paper and say, okay, which number is lower, go the one that costs the least. And I think having that also be the renewable source is what makes it so that transition gets accelerated, because then it just makes natural sense for everybody, not just for the person who might care more about the environment than the other person, or who, I don't know, puts a higher value to what the ecosystem might cost. So I think having it be a one of those no-brainer questions that you ask somebody is what's the important part for that transition to really kind of skyrocket up.
No brainer, like you win in all the different fields there. Like you win in costs, you win in environmentally friendly, you win in you know, consumer cost, right? And all these different categories, right? Because obviously we want to pay the cheapest for the highest quality of energy, right? Anybody wants that. And maybe it would be more deterring if like these processes to create renewable energy cost more, like for the average consumer. Like imagine you have to pay like twice as much essentially for renewables versus like what we have currently. Like maybe that would throw the general market off, and then they're like, oh, I don't want to support that because it's gonna hit my wallet like twice as hard, you know.
That's true, but you don't have that problem though right now, where it's like the costs are pretty on par, so it's not anything, you know, you're not paying double for putting renewables. And I think another part of that is, you know, if people are having more local generation part. Maybe you put a wind turbine up in a town, right? There's different ways to get around that to be able to use the renewable sources to the highest standard and not just have it be, say, full utility companies. But even the utility companies, like wind, especially in the western states, wind, solar is pretty on par with the fossil fuel costs as well, or the prices to generate.
Okay. So when you were looking into renewable energies, was climate change a big component to why that you chose that?
Honestly, for me, I think no, because the way that I got into wind was first from the additive manufacturing side, and additive, yes, has a lot of a push because it's less waste. You can use, all the materials you're using, you're going into your part for the most part, and compared to conventional means, it's typically a lot, or at least a little less energy intensive. That obviously depends on what type of additive manufacturing you're using. However, I think because I went additive to wind, I think it was an added bonus that I thought that it was an important thing to look into. And if I had to spend my time researching something, that I felt like that was a worthy use of my time to do that. But I don't think my path specifically, I didn't get into it originally only because of the climate part, I would say.
Gotcha. Yeah, because like you said, like the people that know about this and have expertise in it are usually the researchers and like the professors that are like really into it, like on a daily basis, right? For the rest of us, like in just the general population, right, it's just like buzzwords, right? Like, oh, climate change, or like this is better, renewables, right? But like actually knowing the difference and like knowing like the impact that it can have, like fossil fuels versus renewables, like on like a quantifiable basis, right? You'd be like, oh, okay, like this impacts it that much, or like this will impact future generations in this amount, right? I think knowing those like statistics and facts is really helpful, and like I'm sure like your average consumer can look these things up on their own, but like I don't imagine like everybody taking a lot of time in order to look up all these key statistics there. So like how do you think like getting the message out and like communicating that better to the general public?
Yeah, I think making things less political helps, and making it no-brainer questions, right? I mean, for instance, there's different lobbying groups that really don't like wind, or that kind of there's a lot of misinformation about things that's just hard for an average person to peddle through. And if you're not an expert, if I'm not an expert in an area, how am I supposed to know what's fact and fiction? And especially if somebody comes in and sounds very convincing, sounds like they know what they're talking about. Like there's a lot of groups that are going out around like rural Ohio towns even, or Pennsylvania, and putting up flyers, talking to all the farmers there about how wind is bad, it's going to give you cancer, don't put these solar panels up because all the rest of us aren't doing it, so you shouldn't as well. And so there's a lot of peer pressure in there. And so when the groups come in that are like that have just like kind of a specific agenda to accomplish a goal and showing the full picture to like here's the benefits that you could have if you lease your farm for in this fallow land, maybe to wind, you could generate all this passive income. However, right, you're going to take over this amount of land. So you kind of, as a farmer, would take that net. Is it a benefit? Is it a negative thing? And make that judgment call yourself. But I think when it becomes political and somebody's telling you their beliefs to it, and saying it strong enough, maybe you trust this person, or you trust that they came from a similar environment as you, and why would you trust the researcher who's coming in from a totally separate area, right? I think bridging that gap is probably most important, because then you get the buy-in from the general public, and you can from both sides of the aisle that can look at that and say, oh, maybe this type of renewable energy generation is a no-brainer, and having everybody on the same page that is a no-brainer, I think is the solution to that. So I think politics is unfortunately the way to go to really to kind of bridge that gap between people.
It's not helpful, right? And to have like so much politics involved in it. And I think part of like one of the branches in politics is the finance component once again, right? And it's like, oh, okay, well, if you stop using my energy source or my product, then I'm going to lose money, right, as a company. And I don't want that to go away. So it's just like not letting go, essentially, to an income source that you always knew and depended on, and give it to another competitor coming in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if you are right, like all fossil fuel companies that are big, like ExxonMobil, Shell, etc., have renewable energy focused research teams that are looking at this specifically because, doing fossil fuels for the rest of life, of generations, is unsustainable simply because it's going to cost more to extract the harder gas, to extract the harder crude out of the ground. And so I think that this is no secret to the fossil fuel industry at all, that it's becoming harder and harder to extract the materials. It's going to become more costly, and so there's going to be a certain point where it is way more expensive to do fossil fuels than these alternative sources or these renewable sources. And so I think ask any fossil fuel executive, any fossil fuel person, and they will tell you that they totally believe that energy choices have to switch over. I think that the argument factor is how quickly do you have to switch over, and that is where like the environmentalists looking at that climate change and global warming come into play compared to maybe the ExxonMobil or the Shell companies too.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it'd be great. It'd be great to have like, know that you're not putting down like any carbon footprint, on Earth, right? Or like doing no negative damage to it, and just all like renewable energies, all positives, right? But unfortunately, like it is messy, and we can't just do that process overnight and do that switch. So yeah, work in progress. So you're officially Dr. Austin.
Yeah, technically, not until I defend.
No?
I'm close.
Okay. Yeah, like now doing like your whole like home stress essentially of your PhD process. Like how was your PhD process?
Yeah, I think I had a good time. I had a blast throughout the whole experience. I think I had a slightly atypical experience than most grad students, I would say, because I really enjoyed all parts of it. I really enjoyed my professor, really enjoyed the lab culture, lab environment, the friends I made from that. The cohorts in the same program as me, right? Started the same year or started different years. They all got along really well. I like the research. I got to work on a lot of different projects. I had incredible freedom to be able to travel wherever I wanted to go, whenever I wanted to do it. Some of it for research, most of it for not. And I just all in all, it's been a pretty good time, pretty good ride.
Yeah. For me, I just think like PhDs can be so long, right? Like, and especially like if you continue this track of schooling that America is used to, it's just like 10 plus years, right? It can be 10 plus years of higher education. Like that's a lot. Like, did you ever think that you would do a PhD?
I think after doing the internships where I did research when I was in Rochester for undergrad, I think I recognized that research was where I thought things were most interesting. And so the natural progression to that was you had to get a PhD to do research. And so that, I think, is what drew me to do a PhD in the first place. But once I'm in it, though, right, once you're in that world or this world here, I mean, the world makes sense to you. You know how to play by the game. You can play by the rules. And so I think it becomes, I don't know, it becomes more normal, I think, than, everybody else, right? Because it is a pretty niche community. And especially the colleges or any higher education or research as a whole. So it is interesting how that becomes the new normal. So it doesn't really feel like you're you're just doing your job, right? It's not as much of you're still in school. You've been here for 15 years, right? I think I'm starting my 25th grade or 26th grade at this point, but I think that it just feels normal, and so nothing feels out of the ordinary.
Hmm. And for somebody like coming into it, right? Like obviously, like maybe you look at uh, so you look at like high school, you look at undergrad and a bachelor's degree, maybe you look at master's degree, maybe you look at now to a PhD, and then I'm sure there's more steps beyond that in doing like a postdoctorate degree, and then eventually like going into professorship. Um, for somebody like coming into it, like how would you recommend them to get into like higher education essentially?
I would say, I mean, it depends on what level you're at. I think that, unfortunately, the way people grades are important as you start out, but then as you start doing more research experience, that is ultimately the goal of higher education to grad school specifically. So your research then becomes more important. So if you got involved with research labs as an undergrad, that makes you significantly more likely or easier to get in for grad school, because simply you've already done the work, you know how to do it. And so I think that's probably the most important one. And then obviously being understanding the basics, being a good student is the underlying part, I think, to most of that.
Yeah, because like I would imagine different students get different opportunities, right? Not everybody gets the same opportunities essentially. And so like if I was like a student without much means, like when I was younger, like during like the K through 12 years, right? Like versus somebody that has a lot of resources, and they have a lot of preparatory school training and stuff, and it's like sort of easy and laid out for them. Like how important do you think it is to like help these underprivileged students get into STEM programs?
Yeah, I think incredibly important, simply because, like you were saying, your means, or I guess a better way is access to it, is income dependent in certain locations, right? Or not even if it's income dependent to get in, right? Because you have application fees, yada yada yada. So that could be a barrier, just solely to write your application and get in. But on top of that, right, like, what if you had to work a second job, or what if you had to work a job or two jobs even, and go to school and pay your way through and also take loans, right? Like at what point does it become just too much to have to be expected to do too many things, and be expected to get good grades, and be expected to do research opportunities that are probably unpaid throughout your undergrad experience, to then apply to grad school, right, to go get your PhD in something. So I think the way that the system is currently set up is incredibly favoring to somebody who has at least the basics means, or can take out a loan, right? In the United States, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you can't take out a loan. So how are you expected to pay your way through your master's, your master's or undergrad, I guess? Specifically, if you're an international student in the United States, when college is so expensive, you can't work over a certain number of hours, and you can't take a loan. So I think that there's a lot of reasons that it's just simply just not fair for everybody to get in.
Yeah, I think the pressure that you're mentioning there is like a lot of times it's really underlooked. Like I mean, I personally like didn't have a lot of means coming up. Like I didn't have like connections or resources, a lot of connections or resources. But I think like still finding those opportunities through people that you meet along the way, finding funding wherever you can find funding, working different jobs where you can really support in that process. But like, do you think right now that, like, what improvements do you think we can have in order to support those students that come from like a more like a tougher upbringing?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what level. I think for starters, I mean, really the answer has to be funding, right? You have to remove the financial barrier to it. and what that looks like, whether that's specific grants and fellowships set aside in order to alleviate the funding concern and the financial strain. That could be one, I think, strong avenue, is just allocating that money, right? But that's a policy concern, and that's a political one that is pretty contentious, right? Because, or, even for instance of like making people don't like to feel that somebody else got something they didn't, right? Even if that person has such a harder time getting to the same point, right? It was just an unequal access to opportunities. I think politically, at least, removing that barrier to like have enough money be available in order to apply for the grants. If you need the money, then I feel like you should be able to get the money in order to go to college, go to whatever you need to do, go to trade school even, right? If that's something, if that's the avenue that you wanted to do.
It is like incredibly frustrating sometimes, right? If you have immigrant parents like I did, like not even knowing the process, or like can't explain it to the next generation of how to apply to college, or like this is the way that you can find scholarships. This is the way that we can keep paying for you to do more SAT rounds, more ACT rounds, right? So you can better your grade, and then therefore maybe you get more money from that. Not having like known any of that knowledge, like that's not even money, right? That's just like base knowledge, or like somebody that's been through this experience of college can pass on to their kids is like invaluable, right? I think it would have streamlined my process much more if I like, this is the FAFSA website. You can go here and then like, please fill it out, because it will give you a lot of tuition benefits. And if you don't make like, if you're under a certain poverty line, or like under a certain financial income line, then you can get even more. Like I really wish that like for people that don't have parents to tell them that they can have somebody to consult to get this information, this more like soft information.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's school dependent too, because what if you have a guidance counselor that tells you these things, and like somebody who had gone through it and knows the ropes that can tell you. But yeah, again, like to your point, what if you're at a school that maybe you're the first person, right? Or yeah, I think making that more accessible for people to understand and realize, and easy to find and all in one place, I think would be really helpful as well.
It could be awkward too, like for the kids, like to sit down in front of like such a big adult counselor to like ask all these tough finance questions, and be like, oh, what does it look like after 4 years? How much does it cost every single semester? What is the aggregate beyond tuition, right? Like what is like, I don't know, what does my bus pass cost? What does my books cost? Or my equipment? And like, okay, maybe I want to do a sport now. Like, how much does that cost, right? Like having someone to sit down and be like, okay, like I understand you want to do this. Like this is really important to you. But like think about how this will impact you later down the line. If you still really want to do it, there are options, right? But just understand like what this loan, or like even understanding loans, right, is really helpful. Like I think a lot of people just like sign the name on the loan and take the money and then think about it later down the line, right? But I think having that explanation from somebody like a advisor or counselor is like really, really great, especially for the kids that don't have parents that can give them that advice.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Like I guess coming into like for these students getting into STEM, right? Like once they like, if they're privileged enough to like get into it and like they have everything set, like in college, do you think there's better ways for them to like cope with the pressure, like once they're actually in the program?
You're saying which pressure? The pressure of feeling like you have to pay back all of your loans, or the pressure of solely the schoolwork of doing well and completing your schoolwork?
Or maybe even like a feeling of what is that called? Imposter syndrome, Like once like, okay, like, wow, like my parents didn't tell me anything, right? I didn't get any information about filling out FAFSA and like all this, but like even I'm able to work through all that, and now I got in, right? I got into a college, right? And now I get to actually like do the degree I wanted to do, right? Like feeling that imposter syndrome going into it, like those are the pressures, because like you see everybody around you, like maybe they had a lot more training in your specific degree, and they had a lot more experiences, and like you feel like you barely just got in, and maybe you feel that you didn't earn it, or like you didn't deserve it, but somehow you got in. Like how do you mitigate those type of pressures?
Yeah, I think one solution to that is having a role model that is honest and tells you their experiences from it, right? Somebody who went through a similar path to you and came out on the other side, and you can see yourself, succeeding and following that same footsteps. I think that's really important. So that goes back to, allowing enough financial, getting rid of those financial constraints so that people who typically aren't going to the higher education can be there and then become the role model for the next group to come in, right? I think that is one great avenue to do that. Yeah, I think for the imposter syndrome, it's a lot of just honest communication with people, because odds are that the person sitting across the room from you, for one reason or another, is feeling the same way or something similar. So I think that is an avenue also that can help. But I think definitely having the role model is probably the strongest way to fix that. A role model who will support you, I think, is the most positive way to solve that problem.
Like role model in terms of like a peer, or like role model in terms of like somebody more accomplished?
I would say somebody more accomplished. Yeah. Okay. Somebody that you look up to, or think that if you accomplish what you're doing, if you accomplish the path that you're on right now, you're going to be in this person's shoes, right? I think that's probably the most powerful role model to kind of squash that imposter syndrome, and have that role model be supportive of you, right? That's obviously, those two things have to go together.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really great. Like, I think it looks like we're doing better with having access, like giving students access to more opportunities. But, it's not always fair. Obviously, you see it, and like you can come back from one semester and you're like, oh no, like this is the bill now. Like I see this is the bill. Like, how do I pay it for next semester? Right. And so like it can get really deterring, like for people going through it, and then they start questioning, like, why does it cost so much, right, in order to get like something that may not return, right? So yeah, I understand that. And so for you now, like having your PhD, do you plan more going down like an academic pathway, like to professorship?
I think I want to keep that door open. I think eventually I would love to be a professor and be a mentor for other people, have my own lab, have students, etc., and to teach. But I think on at least first. So to keep that door open, typically you do a postdoc is the answer. So that's why I'm looking at that postdoc opportunities. And then after that, I think I would want to go to industry first, and then if I decide then to go back to teaching or to become a professor, then go back and become a professor. But I think it makes you a better professor to have done industry first, in my opinion.
Just because they have the firsthand knowledge in some sort of capacity, right? Like in like a professional industrial sense, right? And not sort of like just theorizing in your classroom all day, right? You actually know what's happening in the real world.
Yeah, I think there's an argument for if you're in industry, then you understand that things have to make money. Your product has to work. That's how technology gets implemented into society and has some real world use to it. And I think that's the value that industry gives you. And so then if you become a professor, now you can kind of complement, maybe you have partnerships with industry, or maybe your research is going to eventually be used in this industrial field. And so as a result, you get around that lots of research is done, but never used, never read, never distributed. So if it's not really used for something, did the research really happen, right? I mean, it did happen, of course, but like, how useful is it if it can't be applied to directly, help society? Because at the end of the day, that is really the whole goal of engineering in the first place, is to make some type of societal good or societal progress with what you're doing. So if your publication never got used, like, you did a great job in doing the fundamental research, and maybe it'll get used down the line. So it's good to have those building blocks and contribute to the scientific knowledge. But I think industrial partnerships, or having that backbone in industry to know how things could be most used and kind of already identify that path for your research, I think holds a little bit more value, in my opinion, to be able to be directly used for some type of societal purpose or societal good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, like, you don't really, when you're going through it as like a researcher or a PhD student, like, you don't know if it's going to actually have a broad impact, like broad, real practical impact on the world. And you're just kind of siloed into your own research, and like, hopefully it'll make broad impact, but you don't know. And obviously I don't think everyone does. Like, not every publication is going to be like, oh, okay, that's the one that's going to change society next, right? So with the publications that the students do, like, what is sort of the process for publication on papers?
Yeah, so typically you spend, well, however many times to set up and do your experiments, right? You want to prove whatever you're trying to prove, accomplish whatever hypothesis, or disprove whatever hypothesis you're doing. And then that takes the bulk of the time, I would say. And then you have your results. Hopefully they're good. Maybe they're not. So if they're not, maybe it's going to take you a little bit longer because you need to fine tune something, or you need to make something better, or change your direction to make it new. And then once you finish that, then you just go to the writing stage. You write it up. You're writing a big paper, essentially. And then once you submit that, so you find some type of academic journal that you want to submit to. You submit to the academic journal. And when you submit to the journal, they peer review it. So you have 2 or more experts then that are in your area that it goes to. This could be other professors typically, or researchers in the area. And they read it and say, yep, did a good job, or nope, failed to show XYZ, so don't let this go through. And that is supposed to be then the kind of checkpoint on is your research a contribution to things or not. And if it's not, it doesn't get published. If it does, it does get published. And then once you go through that step point, then then it becomes published. It goes into the academic journal. Now everything's online, so it's all usually online journals. And then it gets disseminated, so anybody with some asterisks can read it.
And so it sounds like these PhD students or candidates are like creating a lot of helpful IP, right? At the end of it, do they get paid to create this IP?
Yeah, so you do get paid. It's technically, though, it's different from the intellectual property side because everything, let's say I have an idea, for instance, and I want to publish on this idea because I have to. I'm a PhD student, so I don't graduate unless I publish. However, I also want to patent it because it's a new idea, right? So the university can help you patent it. They take a little, they get their name on it. They're happy. You're happy. You put your name on it, or maybe you did it alone and you did it. But if you use different resources, that comes into a different game of who owns things. But however, if you were to publish that work first and then patent it second, the patent has no value because you've already put the information out there in the public domain by publishing it. And so it no longer can be privatized. That idea by itself can no longer be privatized because you've already, it's prior art or prior work, or I think prior art is the name of it. And so if you've published it, you can't patent it. And so what people do instead is you patent then publish, just an order up operations thing. So then you typically would patent something first if you have a new idea, and then you publish it. And then if you wanted to use the patents for some type of industrial gain, right, then you could do that as well.
So you're essentially saying it's like it becomes open source if you do it where you publish it first, and then you can't patent it. And so like with the patenting, like how do you know? Like it's like how do you know if something's worthy of patenting, or should you just always patent first to make sure that you're protected?
I think it depends who you are. I think if you are a researcher for pure research sake, there's an argument, or there's a couple arguments. There's one argument that you don't patent and you always publish, because you're putting that research out to everybody, so anybody can use it. A company could use it, another researcher could use it, you or I could use it, and use it for every one and two. There's another argument that you patent it first because now your idea has more value because somebody else can't take it. There's less competition. You've kind of given yourself more time to develop some product out of it that has a higher likelihood of success. So that's, people who tend to patent and publish might fall more into that camp. There's some national labs or NIST who will, patent something and make it a license available for everybody, so everybody knows that they made it, they owned it, but they want to make it so that it could be commercialized. So the license costs $0. Any company can use that technology and be able to put it into a product or something that could be useful.
And so that's more sort of like the broader industry way to look at it is like patenting, and hopefully it goes into market well, and then you'll get paid. But like during a student's time, like during a PhD student's time in school, do they also get paid?
For which part?
For their work.
You get paid separate from your IP. It's just you're getting paid a salary, essentially. You get your stipend to just do work. And so whether or not you publish, well, you should publish because you have to graduate. But your payment is somewhat coupled to your publications because you want to do enough to graduate to publish. But your payment at the end of the day, right? You're getting paid to be the researcher, and research could go well or it could go poorly.
And that's sort of like the risk that the university is taking on there, right? Is that it can go poorly, but they're still paying you a salary.
Yep. Yeah. Because from the academic side, the university looks really good the more research they output. So they can say, we published this many thousand papers in this, and it's kind of their metric. Or alternatively, we patented this amount of research into ideas. Or alternatively, again, we patented and then created these different spin-off companies and these startups that are doing XYZ and have these benefits to society. So I think that's kind of the way that that's kind of like the exchange where they give PhD students money, PhD students return the research, which then could be turned into spin-off companies, publications, etc., patents.
Okay, so it's more like early startup, like sort of seeding.
Yep.
Essentially in that model.
Yep. I think very well. Yeah, could be.
Okay. I think that's really great to hear because you're actually doing work for somebody. Like once you're at this level, right, of research and PhD, like you are doing work for somebody. And then maybe if you're fortunate enough, you develop a product too. And then now you can take that to market, right? You and your team or you and your professor can take it to market and actually do better financially there. I think that's a great model. Sort of going back to sports with it, do you think like for major sport associations like within university and college, like football or basketball, some of like the bigger popular sports there, like do you think they should have the opportunity to make money as well and an income from that?
You're saying should athletes get paid? Is that the question?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think that if I think that has something that's recently been changed to now allow if you use somebody's likeliness in college basketball video game, right, or a football video game, that athlete has to get paid for it. And I think that seems great to me because of just how much money that is raking in, that and how much that the athletes are kind of dependent upon the athletics program to fund their basic needs or not fund their basic needs, depending on like, does it fund 100%? What about your bus pass or all these extras, right? Like how much is a full ride really a full ride if it's athletics? And so I think having athletes get paid for their things seems like it's just something that should be done in order to kind of more fairly disperse it. I mean, they're honestly the ones that are bringing in the money, so they should at least see part of that money, in my opinion.
Yeah. And so you're like you had mentioned the video game there, right? Like maybe that's a product for that an athlete has put out. Is that right?
Or it would be that on the different video games they'll have players, right? And the players typically are the same players that are playing on the team, or it's the same name, same likeliness, etc. And having that person get paid for it, I think, is what has changed now. Is allowing payment for those types of things.
Yeah, like using their likeness essentially, right? For any product, right? If you're in NCAA basketball, maybe you're on the next like basketball video game that comes out. Be like, oh, okay, that's the college player from X school, right? So that for sure. But like you're saying, even allowing the college athlete to put out a product that they can monetize on is a good idea.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that they would have a hard time doing that themselves. Like, who's going to make a video game all about themselves, right? That's hard to make.
Yeah.
And then also to, make it about yourself. So if they do that, great, but unlikely that, one person can do that, or even a team of athletes have time to do that. So, but I think I think it's more on the, if somebody makes it about them, they should get a cut.
So that's more product side. But what if you're just bringing an audience into so for football, for example, right? What if you're just bringing an audience into the field and watching your game as if it was like a professional sport league, right? Now you're actually bringing in people that are willing to pay for season tickets, daily entry tickets, whatever, right? Like, do you think they should see a part of the commission there as well?
Yeah, honestly, sure. Why not? I think I say, why not? I think I have so little personal investment in it that I probably, it doesn't matter to me if it's shared between more people. Sure, go for it. I mean, another way of doing that is just paying more for making a full ride is like just making sure that if you're on an athletic scholarship, it's, you're fully taken care of, if that's the case. If you're making like so much money for the school, I think that becomes a no-brainer. But yeah, I think I also don't have a super strong opinion on that because I'm kind of so far out of that.
I think like psychologically, it's weird for schools to think about paying their athletes. Right, because it's like you're here to learn, right?
Yeah,
like,
true, but they're already doing it because you already have the full ride, right? Or you're giving out athletic scholarships, which is, essentially the same thing. It's just that somewhere somebody along the way decided that it was better to pay. Well, it was because somebody along the line thought that it was more pure to keep athletics not out of money, and so the way to get around that was to give a scholarship instead.
Yeah.
And then now people are realizing that maybe that doesn't quite cut it, so now they're switching to more you get paid for it, right? But it's essentially the same thing. It's just you're calling it a different thing.
You're right. I think like in the past it was opportunity based, right? So for these student athletes, it's like you have the opportunity to go into the National League. You have the opportunity to play for X team, right? That's professional, right? Rather than like, oh, okay, like I'm going to pay you salary now, a monthly salary that you can sustain yourself. Like I think hopping past that hurdle is difficult for college.
Yeah, that's true. But I think it only feels weird because it's new and it's what people aren't used to and haven't done in the past. I think if you started that way, it would feel weird to give somebody tuition payments because you're so used to paying them a stipend, right, to live on. So I think it's just what's changed and what's not changed.
Yeah, and I like when you said about like the sort of the tuition money, like having that waived for. I think that's really great, right? Because I understand like the university doesn't want to lose money. Like nobody wants to lose money, right? And having to pay out your athletes and your IP producers, right? Whatever the case may be. But you can waive like tuition payments too, right? And that's more hypothetical money that you can just kind of discharge like from the student. I think that's a great way to go about it. Yeah,
I agree. That's probably why that is what's mostly currently done, right? Is the full ride for tuitions, get rid of the monopoly money.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, you're a very interesting person, and I think you do a lot of different things. Like namely one of that, I know you're very much into dancing. Like why do you enjoy dancing so much?
Yeah, I think I started it when I came here. Actually, I learned in Boulder, learned at the Avalon, which is this really great ballroom that's huge open floors, hardwood floors everywhere, tons of people, great community. And it was kind of a fluke that I joined the one day with some of the other interns, and then really liked it. But not really liked it, but it helped to have people that also wanted to do it, because I think it took me 5 times before I felt like comfortable talking and dancing with people at the same time, just because I had to concentrate on what my feet were doing or what my hands were doing, and it was hard to do both. And so once I had that down, then it became significantly more fun. And then I think it was just a fun little social outlet. It's kind of, you talk to people for 3 or 4 minutes, and just like, yeah, sometimes you see people that you don't see outside of dancing, and it's kind of your dance group friends. And other times it's just a really great way to just meet a ton of just people that you would never have contact with if it wasn't through this shared activity that you did together.
So it's just like the more for like the community part, just getting to like know different people. Obviously dancing on its own is like something interesting to learn, but like beyond that, it's like the community is what keeps you going back.
Yeah, I think the community and the people was probably the biggest thing. I think a way of figuring that out would be if I were to do a dance that I dance by myself, right? If I do like a hip hop dance or something, would I have equal fun as I do during the dances that I do, which is more partnered work? And I think for myself, the answer would be no, that I really like having other people involved in it. And I am probably more there for the social and the people side than I am for the soul dancing. Like dancing is very fun on its own, and I'm sure I would have fun, but I think that I would have less fun if I wasn't doing it with other people.
What are your like favorite styles of dance?
I think particularly salsa and bachata are the top two, and then I dabble in some country swing dancing, and that's pretty much it. So maybe some ballroom stuff every once in a while. I would say yes to other types of dancing to try them, but definitely the top two there are the more Latin ones.
Okay. Yeah, the Latin ones because they're more like flowy and they're more like rhythmic.
I would say so. I think I like the music better. It's a little bit more upbeat, I would say. And yeah, that's probably the biggest reason.
Okay. And like, kind of going to city and like different places, country to country. Like, do you try to go in like different dance studios? Is it dance?
Yeah, dance classes, dance studios, dance socials.
Dance classes are
whatever it is.
around, or do you more like focus on local dance?
I think it's fun to find, well, one, now that I've done the ones for a while, I feel comfortable and confident doing them. So I think that's a big thing that helps. I think that, it's something now that when I find new cities, it's a great way to meet the local crowd, right? Is to go dancing with them. So I think that's been the new constant thing where I find a pool and I dance. And that's like my two things in the new cities that I go to, especially if I'm going to live there.
Yeah. Dancing is tough. Dancing is like, as you said, like you have a lot to concentrate on, whether you're trying to keep conversation as you're dancing or like focus on your footwork or your own moves, like putting it all together and having like the confidence to go and do it. I think it's big. Like that's why a lot of people like don't like dancing, because it's like a big part of it is the confidence part. Like how do you like kind of find that?
I think you just do it enough that you feel confident in it. It's one of those things where people don't feel confident because they don't do it. You're not taught it either, right? Nobody in the most U.S. cities, right? Dancing is not something that's done. Versus sometimes in other countries, like you learn how to dance as part of your classes for things, but here that's not the case. So I think then as a result, you really only do it if you like get involved with a group or a friend that's interested in doing it and drags you along, and then you like it and then you start to do it. And I think that's kind of the typical route that most people go. So I think just doing it enough to be confident in it, which is 5 times, I would say, is the number for that. And then you become much more confident and then enjoy it a lot more as well.
Fair enough. Okay. And then also an interesting thing was for travels, right? You said like during your PhD time here, like you've been able to see a lot of travel, or like do a lot of travel and see a lot of different places and people, some of it related to education, some of it not. Would you say that like traveling is a big part of your life?
I think more so since I've came here, it has been. I think for the internships in Rochester, that was, I traveled around to different places because I was doing internships in different places, and then I think that kind of started me on wanting to explore more and see more of the U.S. and then maybe want to explore more of the world. And so then now I've had more means because now I'm getting paid to come here, so I have a little bit more money that I can actually spend on cheap trips somewhere.
Yeah.
And so so then we went to Vancouver, Seattle, El Paso, Turkey, and just like a huge one. I'm excited to, when I graduate, have a big map at the end of my, like the last slide that has all of the either pictures or little dots of all the places that I've gone. And because I forget a lot of the places too. I have pictures and I remember them, right, but I can't tell you all of them, so I think it'd be fun. I think the number is high. I think it would be fun to see that number.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think traveling is great. I think traveling is one of those experiences that is really difficult to come by. Number one, because you have to have the finances and the time to do so, and sort of like conflicting that maybe if with your job, if you're running like a traditional job. And so like being able to do that is truly a gift to be able to have. And then especially if like it's really helpful if you know people in different places, and like maybe they can help you out there in terms of accommodations as well. Yeah. Is there any future travels that you're looking forward to?
I think hopefully Alaska sometime soonish, and then love to go. The potential to go to Greece later, and then that would be both this summer. And then what else? Oh, maybe potentially going to Australia, and my cousin's there. One of my friends is going to go there, and so doing that in, I don't know, January or so, I think would be good too. And then maybe when I graduate, I'll have a good 4 months to figure out what I want to do. And I think that would be a good time to maybe travel somewhere totally random, or just go to more different countries and spend a longer trip, because traditionally I do shorter trips. And so if I want to do a longer trip, I think that would be the time to do it.
How do you pick your travels? Do you pick your travels because you think it's somewhere like fun to go, or do you pick your travels like because of like somebody's there and it helps with like the cost?
I think for sure if somebody's there, it's a plus. I think if it's a cheap flight, that's another plus. That's usually the biggest thing, is if it's a cheap flight. And then if I really want to go there, then I'll pick that too. But primarily it's been cheap flights.
Yeah. No, that's what I do too, right? Because it's like traveling costs a lot, right? There's a lot of components to it, obviously, like the flight itself, plus accommodations, plus food, plus you can keep adding all these pluses, and then like at the end of the day, even though you like spend a little bit on each component, the aggregate can come out and be like, oh my gosh, shoot, that was like a couple $1,000s there that just went down the drain from traveling. So for sure, and like Greece and Australia, those sound really exciting.
The Greece one would be technically research related, so that could be the potential for that. Australia would not be research related at all, and so that would be all me. So that one would have to be a bigger trip, simply that's such a long flight, so I have to really milk that.
Well, once again, I think you're an incredibly interesting person, and you've done a lot in the field of engineering and sports. I think it's interesting to see where you go from here and what you choose to do. And I just hope it's something that you really want to do and that you're interested in, and I hope you find a lot of excitement in whatever you choose to do next.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Awesome. That's a wrap.